delighted to welcome Jory Griffith, who's a biodiversity data science at the GEO BON Secretariat. With a background in ecology and data science, Jory plays a key role in developing BON in a Box to assist conservation planners in calculating biodiversity indicators for policy and reporting. She works closely with collaborators to integrate analysis pipelines, making biodiversity data more accessible and actionable for decision makers at multiple scales. So if you're ready, Jory, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this event. As mentioned, I'm Jory, and I have a lot of light coming in through my window. And I'm a biodiversity data scientist at the GEO BON Secretariat in Montreal. And today I will be telling you about BON in a Box, which is an open and collaborative platform for biodiversity monitoring, indicator calculation, and reporting. So for those of you who don't know, GEO BON is a network of over 3,500 researchers in 150 countries who are all working to monitor biodiversity change. And anyone can become a member for free, so if you're not already signed up, please do so on our website. But GEO BON consists of a number of smaller biodiversity observation networks that can be national, such as French BON or Columbia BON, regional such as Asia Pacific BON, or thematic such as Marine BON or now Move BON. And so one of GEO BON's main initiatives is to standardize data collection to be able to make comparisons across space and time. So the GEO BON network came together to establish the essential biodiversity variables and the essential ecosystem service variables. And so one of GEO BON's big goals is to establish a global biodiversity observing system, which is analogous to the global climate observing system that already exists. And the idea is that it would be a network of networks that are all communicating and sharing data and analyses to monitor the state of the world's biodiversity and detect trends at different scales. So in this vision, we saw many ways to share data, such as GBIF, but we saw a gap in this, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but this analytics section here. So there was a lack of a platform to share analyses in an open, transparent, and reproducible way. And so Andy and Maria Cecilia, the GEO BON co-chairs, created the BON in a Box modeling tool. And BON in a Box was already an existing platform where users could search and share for projects and tools. But they added this modeling tool, which is a software to integrate biodiversity data and models to generate useful insights into the status and trends of biodiversity. So it's a tool to calculate essential biodiversity variables and indicators based on curated open source repository of community contributed analysis pipelines. So this is just a conceptual diagram about how BON in a Box can be used by a BON. So first we have this biodiversity observation network. In this example, Columbia. They're collecting data through various means such as satellites, field sampling, camera traps, etc. And then this data can be fed into a BON in a Box pipeline to calculate biodiversity information. So essential biodiversity variables and indicators. And the way it does this is through analysis pipelines, which are these interconnected sets of scripts to run a full analysis from start to finish. So these are scripts in R, Julia, or Python. They're connected through inputs and outputs, which can be essentially any file type, such as a CSV or a GeoTIFF or whatever file type you want to use. And because these are all connected through inputs and outputs, the tool can run a whole analysis from start to finish without you having to go into RStudio, run and manually run each script sequentially. And so these analyses can be shared between BONs and used to calculate indicators for reporting to things such as the Convention on Biological Diversity or other policy goals. And so there's sometimes confusion about this. So BON in a Box can be used for several things. The first is computing policy relevant biodiversity information. So this is your EBVs and indicators. But beyond that, BON in a Box can also be used to run and share any analysis that's relevant to biodiversity monitoring at any scale. So for example, the R package that Peter was just talking about, that could be plugged into a pipeline in BON-in-a-Box to make it easier to use. So any analysis that's run in R, Julia, or Python that you think could be relevant to other people in other places, you could share through BON-in-a-Box. And also we're working on pipelines to assess sampling gaps and prioritize areas for monitoring to improve biodiversity information in a given area and help fill these gaps. So as many of you know, biodiversity monitoring is very difficult for many reasons. There's both an overload of data. You just heard that there are over 3 billion GBIF records. There's satellite data coming in all the time. This data is scattered around various sources, and it can be really difficult to mobilize and translate that into useful biodiversity information. But at the same time, this data is biased, and there's a huge lack of data in many places. There's this fragmented collaboration, so people are doing the same things in parallel. They're not talking to each other. They're wasting time and resources. There's information that is scattered around between papers, GitHub repositories, Zenodo links, etc., and it can be difficult to access. There's constant constraint of time and money, and there's really complex code that is not necessarily reproducible or accessible. So of course, no one platform can solve all of these challenges, but BON-in-a-Box was designed to help with many of them. So first, BON-in-a-Box helps facilitate collaboration by providing an open, transparent, and modular platform. And it helps to operationalize existing knowledge by allowing people to share analyses in an open and reproducible way to reduce duplication of effort and save resources. It increases the fairness of the analysis process, so findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible. You hear this often for data, but is also important for the analysis process. And it also increases scientific rigor by allowing other scientists to reproduce and build on previous work. And BON-in-a-Box can also help overcome code complexity and data overloads by integrating data with models. So BON-in-a-Box automates the process of pulling data from publicly available data sets through APIs and analyzing it to produce indicators. So it can pull data from GBIF, OBIS, satellite data, etc. And therefore, pipelines in BON-in-a-Box can be easily updated when new data comes in. But there are also lots of situations in which a country or organization has its own data that's not publicly available for whatever reason, and they want to use their own data instead of these public or global data sources. So BON-in-a-Box allows users to analyze their own data without it having to leave their computer, allowing them to maintain sovereignty over this data. So right now we have a number of pipelines to calculate EBVs and indicators. They've all been contributed by members of the GeoBon network from around the world. So we have the genetic diversity indicator, which was contributed by a group in Zurich. We have the biodiversity intactness index, which was contributed by a group at the Natural History Museum in London. So we have lots of collaborators from around the world. But now I just want to show you really quickly what the tool actually looks like. So I'm going to exit out of this. Can you guys see my screen all right? Okay, awesome. So essentially, when you create a pipeline in BON-in-a-Box, it creates this user form where the user can input the parameters of interest. So this is just an example of one that we created for a conference we were at last week, but it pulls a phenology layer from the Copernicus data ecosystem from the European Space Agency, does some calculations on it, and then outputs results. So the user can input the country that they want, the season that they're interested in, the bands, etc. So this is kind of like the user interface that a person running the analysis would use. Start and end year, etc., spatial resolution, and the creator of the pipeline decides what these inputs are going to be. So then you run the pipeline. I'm not going to do it now because it takes a little bit, but I'll just show you what the results look like. So this is what it looks like after a pipeline is run. The user can look at all of the detailed results. So these are like the R logs, and they can also use this to debug. All of the intermediate results are available to download here. And then all of the final results that the person creating the pipeline decided they wanted to be their outputs are available here. So you can view them. But then you can also look at this more user-friendly results viewer here and look at the actual results. So that this is looking at the change in the length of this growing season over time in Belgium. And so the user can kind of play around with this and look at the layers in a more sort of user-friendly way. And then what the actual pipeline editor looks like, this would be more on the side of the contributor of the analysis. So you have all of the scripts that are available on the left here. You can drag the scripts into the pipeline editor and then connect them through these inputs and outputs. So obviously outputs that are connected to inputs have to be in the same file format, but essentially this just makes the whole process automated. So the person actually running the analysis doesn't have to deal with any of this. They can just go to that nice user-friendly user form and run it. And then all of these are well documented with metadata and all of the scripts as well. Right. So this is just a schematic of how BON in a Box kind of fits into this big idea of the GBIOS, or the Global Biodiversity Observing System. And it allows biodiversity observation networks to share these analyses and use analyses that have been contributed by others, for example, by the people in the GEO BON network. And it allows for the standardization of these analyses between countries and regions, so this information can be translated across jurisdictions. So BON in a Box creates this sort of interstitial tissue within and between bonds. So thank you so much for listening. Just a couple links here we have on our website, this first QR code, a BON in a Box preprint. It's been submitted, but you can read it now on the website. We also have a Bring Your Own Pipeline technical workshop in a few weeks, which might interest some of you. The idea is that a person who has an analysis that they want to share can bring it to the workshop, and then we teach people how to adapt it to become a pipeline within BON in a Box. So that you can also register for this. This is our main website, but there's an events page, and so you can register there. And then also we just released these tutorial videos for how to install and contribute pipelines to BON in a Box, which you can find through this QR code. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Jory. That was great. Love the highlights of these opportunities to engage with the tutorials and the events too. So we'll make sure those are up on Wild Labs too. One question that I had that I put in the chat is just like, who are the main current users of BON in a Box? Is it mostly the bonds and those networks themselves? And then are there any kind of areas of the community, like potential future users that you've been focused on or are thinking about who maybe aren't using it much yet?
Yeah, so right now it was in sort of a proof of concept phase. So it's not being like widely used right now. But we did have collaborators in Colombia. Maria Cecilia, who's the co-chair of GEO BON, works at the Humboldt Institute, which is kind of their national research institute. So she both helped like develop this, but also it's being pretty widely used like within their institution. So that's like an example of a use case of BON in a Box. But who we're really focused on, I mean, there's like huge uses for it, but we've been really focused on like the country users and making it a tool to help with reporting to the Global Biodiversity Framework. So we went to COP and we were, talking to people there, and I think there's huge potential for it to be useful there, but we obviously need contributors to contribute pipelines to calculate these indicators. So we're also like really looking for more contributors to put pipelines into the tool so that it can be more useful.
Wonderful, thank you. It looks like Sarah Davidson also had a question about these pipelines. Sarah, are you here to jump in?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. It's getting dark here, but I can turn my video on. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, so thank you for me, the most helpful part of that was at the end where you kind of walked through one of these pipelines. Is there how do I find one of those? Because I've gone to the website before and I can't find the pipeline with that GUI that you showed.
Yeah, so we should put this on our website, but we have, so essentially Bon in a Box has to be downloaded on your desktop if you want to actually interact with it and
Okay.
contribute code and stuff. But we have a couple online instances that you can look at. So if you go, I can put it in the chat here.
A desktop download is fine too. I guess I never saw the link.
Yeah, it's I'm just gonna stop sharing here so I can, but if you want to just kind of look at the tool and look at what we have available right now, I'll just put a link in there. Where you can kind of, yeah, because I think interacting with the platform is really important to people, for people to understand it. But if you really want, if you want to run your own code in the tool, you have to fully download it. But yeah, you can explore it a bit more with that link.
Thanks.
Awesome.
And then my second question was whether there's any option or requirement to publish the underlying algorithm, what is it doing and how to interpret the results and how how do you make sure people don't put in crappy data and then totally misinterpret the output. Often, well, if we I'm thinking of also NASA, satellite imagery based products, they always have a published algorithm that gives you a bunch of detail about what it's doing and that gives you information about quality control, what has been, ground truthed or not, for example. Is there a process for that kind of documentation?
Yeah, so we have our markdowns and stuff to document both each script and the full pipeline. So that's minimum requirement to contribute a pipeline is to fill out all of that documentation, which is just descriptions and example inputs and outputs and things. A lot of our contributors also did more extensive documentation in a markdown file. So that people can have more guidance on how to use it. As far as quality control, so sort of our vision for how the tool will be used is not someone who's not a scientist at all, running things, but more that we are giving a tool for potentially someone in an environmental ministry or someone with more local knowledge about how to parameterize these models would be running them. So we can't necessarily give guidance on how to use it in every area at every spatial scale, because we don't have the expertise to do that. But as far as guidelines of how to use it and how to parameterize it, yeah, we have documentation for that.
I'm going to jump in with one more question before we move on to open discussion. Thanks, Jory. That was really, I think, filled in a lot of gaps that I had in my own head about how these workflows are envisioned and actually functioning across on the scale of the entire GEO BON network. So it's very exciting, and I think presents a lot of opportunities for some of the ideas we have for mobilizing movement data in a way that's accessible to decision makers. So on that note, something that we've been working on is trying to define an essential biodiversity variable for movement. And I noticed that there are workflows for EBVs in there. So assuming we develop a workflow for an EBV, we put it in BON in a box for a movement EBV. It's in BON in a box. How do downstream users interact with EBV workflows in BON in a box And the context I'm thinking of is like this idea that movement data can inform other EBVs in ways that we may not even be thinking about. So is my question clear? Yeah, mostly wondering how you interact
Sort
with
of, yeah.
EBVs.
I mean,
Okay.
definitely we would love if you contributed an EBV workflow for movement data. As far as downstream users, do you just mean like users like in other places, like using it in other contexts, or?
I guess like are people using EBVs? I know EBVs, I mean, I think EBVs get integrated into indicators. But if there isn't yet a movement indicator, how would people potentially, like invasive species is one example we've already talked a little bit about today. Like if someone could access the movement EBV for an invasive species indicator, is that something they would do through BON in a box, or is there other steps we need to take as a community to like make those connections for people?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a complicated question because, yeah, I presented it very much as like EBVs to indicator workflow. In reality, like as at least for the indicators in the global biodiversity framework, like not all of them are based on EBVs, and a lot of them are like, calculated by like the custodial institutions, and there's not necessarily like open workflows for them. I think like ideally, as far as like indicators for movement data or indicators in general in the GBIF, like it would be sort of this iterative process where as we like figure out better indicators, we can like change the indicators that are in the monitoring framework. But obviously like it's not just relevant to the global biodiversity framework. If you guys are developing an indicator for movement and you put that in BON box to be shared, between or between your network or two other networks, that can be like hugely useful. So yeah, I mean, it's really like you guys are creating this BON, and there's huge potential for you guys to kind of set this standard for movement data. So we would love to talk more about working with you guys with that.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jory.